This week in Texas politics was filled with more campus protesting, but there were several other big stories that happened this week. Let's march through it all, and we'll begin with our headlines from our panel, and we'll start first with political analyst Mark Wiggins. Mark, what's your headline?
Pennsylvania billionaire deep faking lies to Texas voters.
Annie Spillman with Main Street Relations. Annie, what's your headline for the week?
Vehicle inspections are going away in 2025.
And Philip Jankowski with the Dallas Morning News. Philip, what's your headline?
Protests testing Republicans' commitments to free speech.
The outbreak of anti-Israel, pro-Palestine protest on college campuses, prompting a strong response. Several congressional and state lawmakers say foreign students expressing support for the terror group Hamas should have visas revoked and deported. Phil, Texas Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne is a leading voice in that move.
Yeah, she announced this week that she's got a law that she wants to get passed called the Hamas Supporters Have No Home Here Act. Say that 3 times fast, but what it really amounts to is that she wants the federal authorities to be able to deport folks, foreigners in the country who end up committing a crime during what she describes as actually the bill says is a pro-terrorist or anti-Semitic rally. Of course, most of the demonstrators at these campuses would say that their rallies aren't anti-Semitic or even pro-terrorist, but that's not stopping Republicans like her from labeling them as such.
And that's the fine line there, right, Annie, is how do you define this and how do you say what's one or the other?
Right. I mean, it's obviously an emotional issue on both sides. And, I don't know if it went unnoticed, but I wanted to acknowledge that, Governor Abbott just yesterday issued a proclamation proclaiming May as Jewish American Heritage Month in Texas. So if he wasn't clear before, this proclamation clearly endorses his solidarity with Israel and the Jewish community. And just to remind your viewers that, there was a call last year in fall to have these visas revoked by Senator Mark Rubio and issuing a bicameral resolution. Ultimately, it didn't pass. To see Van Dyne out there pretty strongly vocal on this issue, including other issues like the debt and Biden's burdensome environmental policies. She's making a lot of noise out there on social media, and it plays well in her Dallas district, and maybe she's seeking some higher aspirations as a side note there.
Mark, more political than actual, slippery slope, right?
Well, it does touch on some very delicate First Amendment questions, but I think it's kind of ironic here that a lot of the response to these protests has only fueled more and bigger protests. And, that's exactly what we've seen play out in a lot of these situations.
Now, on the same day that Van Dyne issued her deportation bill, activists here in Texas urging federal officials to grant amnesty to more than 1 million undocumented immigrants. And they also called for Governor Abbott to not enforce the laws like SB 4, pushing immigration crackdowns and saying that hurts businesses. What's the business community feel about all this?
Well, frankly, I think it's rich that labor union activists are changing their rhetoric to fit the narrative in this case by saying that immigration crackdowns will hurt businesses. It's intentionally confusing for them to conflate worker protection and workplace safety with immigration status and Senate Bill 4. On one hand, they want to demonize employers by claiming that they mistreat and don't pay workers, and they want to encourage the workers to strike and claim they have no protections. But on the other hand, they want to say that the governor is keeping these immigrants from being part of the same potential workforce and part of the same pool of employers. They would make better use of their time by starting to educate immigrants of their rights and frankly stop grandstanding with statements mired in deception.
Mixed messaging there, Mark?
Well, certainly border security and immigration are they're extremely potent issues in this election cycle. And the Republicans have used it to very good effect in a lot of ways. And I think progressives are still looking for an angle to come at sort of the border security and immigration issues that are going to appeal to a larger group of voters. But I think you're going to continue to see this come up as an issue in this campaign cycle.
It is a powerful argument. Our immigrants are an integral part of our workforce, right, Philip?
Oh, absolutely. And I do feel like that's something that a lot of people sort of intentionally would kind of bury their heads in the sand over that. The fact that the economic engine of Texas and really a large part of this country is built on the cheap labor that immigrants provide.
Well, the mudslinging in the state house runoff races certainly intensifying this week. Hard-right groups sending out mailers described as a deep fake, which had a Photoshop image of House Speaker Dade Phelan being embraced by Nancy Pelosi and then standing at a podium at a Democrat fundraising event. That ad comes as a House hearing on AI was here. That ad comes as a House hearing on AI was held here in Austin. Mark, that just may help a rewrite on a law that's already there in regards to deep fakes.
Rudy, I mean this without a trace of hyperbole. I think this is one of the most important issues when it comes to securing elections. I mean, think about this. Billionaires who don't even live in Texas are using AI to create deep fakes that are meant to deceive millions of Texas voters. And right now, there's absolutely nothing that voters can do to verify whether what they're being shown is even real or not. So I think a ban on political deepfakes, frankly, is must-pass legislation next session.
Certainly campaign interference. Don't you agree, Phil?
I don't know about campaign interference, but I really just kind of the whole latest thing in the addition to that just really just makes me just wonder, when will this election cycle ever end? Guys, we're almost there. But all I can say is that I continue to be surprised with a lot of the dirty pool some groups are willing to play. The addition of deep fakes and AI generated images is one thing, but we've had misinformation coming this whole time. Abbott calling his enemies on school choice soft on immigration, Paxton on his whirling revenge tour, and Patrick, not really being pretty upfront about how he is possibly trying to prop up a proxy speaker. There's just a lot of things going on, and with the addition of deep fakes, things could only get more chaotic.
Annie, is that the concern? Photoshop pictures on campaign ads. We shouldn't really worry too much about that they look fake. It's the deeper fakes that are out there that we should be watching.
Oh, it's absolutely terrifying. I mean, this completely out of control. And unfortunately, the general population absolutely believe what they get in their mailbox or see on TV. I mean, I heard it firsthand when I was out volunteering at the polls. They would, yell and scream at the volunteers saying, we know the truth. We know what we see in our mailbox. I was watching the AI hearing just this last week, and I have to tell you, it was absolutely amazing. The chairman started it out by playing a recording of what we thought were all of the, committee members making a statement on AI and their thoughts on the matter. And it was each of the committee members' voices. However, he stopped the recording. It turns out none of those committee members actually made any of those statements, but it was their voice, and it was quite scary. It was all AI generated.
Documents made public this week indicate several Texas airports, among those being used by the Biden administration to fly in immigrants who are allegedly classified as inadmissible. The question is, will this list have more political impact on a campaign or in a courtroom? Annie, what do you think on that? Annie, do you think that this issue is going to be more impactful on the campaign trail or in a courtroom where a lot of these cases are being going in regards to the government's authority?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I think it's going to be a little bit of both. The chairman of House Homeland Security is definitely looking to affect political pressure and change, I believe, by posting the locations of the airports on social media and asking, is your city on the list? In doing so, you can expect a lot of these constituents to reach out to their congressperson and senators, and as the chairman put it, hold the administration accountable for its open borders agenda and devastating impact on our homeland security. So, he's obviously trying to push these folks to reach out to, their elected officials. And legally, they say it violates the Immigration and Nationality Act and is an abuse of the president's authority. So this is obviously an issue that will be ripe for political gamesmanship and legal challenges. Does
it fly over everyone's head or does it land in the courtroom? Mark, what do you think? Pun intended.
Oh, I see what you did there. I think, Rudy, like I mentioned earlier, it's Republicans see this as the most potent issue of this campaign cycle and their most effective one. And they see it as one of the biggest weaknesses for the administration. And they're going to weaponize this against the administration to the greatest extent possible. And that's what you're saying.
Just another border issue, Philip?
Yeah, I agree. Biden's been on his back foot, this whole time, and any chance that the Republican Party is going to get to continue to jab at him and at what really is kind of a key weakness for the president heading towards November, that's where I think the real impact is going to be from this.
Ken Paxton back in the news. He made a surprise appearance at the Trump hush money trial and then announced a multi-state lawsuit against the Biden administration. The efforts to close what's known as the gun show loophole. Both are red meat moments. Philip, is this coincidence? Both playing out at the same time, or are there no coincidences here in Austin?
That's a coincidence. Paxton's entire legal strategy has been to delay this lawsuit as long as he can. So him to continue to do that is just going with the same strategy that he's had. I will say it's notable that we did see that Paxton can appear in a court.
Oh, that's good. I see what you did there. Everyone's got the zingers on this one. What do you think, Mark? Is this more about the whistleblowers, or was this just more red meat stuff?
Well, Paxton has long sought to compare his own legal problems to Trump's and cast him as akin to what Trump is experiencing. And this is all part of that. Paxton would certainly love a Trump endorsement if he does, in fact, decide to challenge Senator Cornyn. And I do think it's worth pointing out that this is in the middle of Trump's Veep auditions, although I haven't seen Paxton's name mentioned anywhere as a potential contender.
And it's kind of strange. I didn't see Trump mentioning that Paxton was there. Did you, Annie?
No, I was watching some of the national news yesterday and they showed some footage of Paxton there and made note of it. I would, on a business standpoint, like to speak to the gun law loophole. Currently we've got brick and mortar business owners selling guns who pay the money and deal with the paperwork to be licensed in their respective states. So this new gun law does level the playing field in this case by virtually outlawing private sales of firearms between individuals unless they comply with these new regs regarding licensing and background checks if they're selling guns repeatedly. And I don't think it's any surprise that this law is being challenged in court by a Second Amendment activist in General Paxton. But I did want to speak practically as to how the law is applied and it now being expanded to others to comply with the same regulations that brick and mortar gun sellers are required to follow.
Governor Greg Abbott has ordered TEA to ignore the Biden administration's rewrite of Title IX protections for women to include gender identity. And it certainly sets up another fight between the state and the federal government again. Is that really what this is going to be about?
Oh, they always have a battle with the federal government. Any attention we can bring to Texas is good. No media is bad media. Yes, on Monday, Texas joined 9 other states in legal challenges to the changes made in Title IX, asking the court to halt and overturn the new policy. The Title IX changes aren't set to take effect until August, which is only 3 months away. I don't expect this to be resolved by then. So I see it putting the Texas Education Agency in a troubling spot as well. Comply with the changes in the federal law or take heed with Governor Abbott's instruction to ignore the president's dictate.
You can't help but also ignore how the state is handling this in regards to telling the federal government we will not comply, but telling local communities, hey, with the state law, you got to comply with us. A little hypocrisy there, Philip?
I wouldn't call it hypocrisy. I don't want to go that far, but there has been I've covered city politics and state politics, and there's been a real sort of shift on local control for years, really in the past decade when it comes to the Republican Party. So, even in something like the report on the Texas Panhandle wildfires, there was a lot of deep suspicion of the federal government, even like in between the lines there on that. So but you do point out that there is a big sort of Republicans do try to square that circle on what can a city do versus what can the federal government do, and it seems to me that it's more who's in control of what entity.
Mark, what do you think? Hypocrisy?
I think, Rudy, it's worth pointing out that the revision doesn't touch on sports, which a lot of people thought that it might. But I mean, it's clearly still an election issue, particularly on the right. And I think it played out about how you'd expect it to.
A report on the Panhandle Wildfire came out this week. That report from a special House committee is recommending some legislation on some things in regards to better power line inspections and maintenance, better communications, and the possible formation of a special state air force to respond to wildfire outbreaks. Philip, any surprises in the report on that one?
Yeah, two things surprised me. One really was just kind of seeing when you read it all and recognizing the vastness of that fire. I know that at the time and during those reports, we were saying it was the largest in Texas history, but when you see it all put together in one spot and see over just a couple of days, 1 million acres of the Panhandle burnt. The other thing that surprised me was the consistency in what caused these fires. There were several fires, but most of them were caused by old broken down electrical poles and wires that weren't just the cause for the big fire, but many of these smaller ones.
Mark, that Air Force proposal is going to make headlines, but it really is about accountability with those power lines, right?
You know, Rudy, you and I have covered these sort of things for a long time, and it's frustrating because these postmortems always contain a few similarities. A lack of regulation and a lack of preparation, and oftentimes those are driven by a lack of funding. And, you know, the problem is it almost never results in the kind of investment that's needed to fix these things, because by the time the next legislative session meets, you know, everyone has moved on and the big political fights take up all the oxygen. So, you know, I'd like to see, I think we'd all like to see some important changes take place after this, and we'll all be watching, or at least we'll be watching.
After the big fires in Bastrop, we had some changes. The PUC was told to start monitoring these power companies and their power lines and to track them. They're doing that. They just started doing that right before the outbreak. So, Annie, is it just a tweaking, or do we need a bigger hammer?
I think the hammer's been laid. I think the hammer's been dropped. You know, the PUC is under a lot of discretion under the microscope. You know, I will say on, you know, a couple of things here. Small businesses are, and obviously homeowners are generally the ones that are most hurt when there's a disaster. Small businesses don't have cash reserves on hand. You know, they want to get their employees back, you know, up and running so they can make some money and put food on the table. So it has a cyclical, you know, effect there. I spoke to one of the members of the committee and asked him what especially stood out after hearing testimony. And he emphatically said, we need help to fund our volunteer fire departments. And so the committee determined that the interoperability of emergency response providers and the government officials to communicate across jurisdictions and levels of government is critical, and resources need to be made to support a plan. Part of that plan I want to note is including an integration of better broadband enabled technology. And this will be also a great resource for businesses in rural Texas.
Let's wrap it up there, and we will now go to our one word for the week from our panel, and we'll start with Mark. What's your word?
Deepfake.
Annie, what's your word for the week?
Well, in honor of small businesses during the Small Business Week, resilience.
Philip, your word for the week?
Indicted? Question mark? Just recognizing what's going on with Henry Cuellar today.
And with that, we'll close it out. Another week in Texas politics.